Indeed, we've got the latest industrial strife now. We've got the walkout of almost 2,000 workers at the UK's largest container port. That happened yesterday. For 8 days now, it could see serious disruption to the UK's supply chain of imported goods. Unite, the union, says the strike action at Felixstowe over pay conditions. The latest, indeed, of a summer of discontent, it seems, with action affecting a number of industries. Just this morning, Francis, look away now, barristers voted to go on an indefinite, uninterrupted strike in England and Wales from next month. Could we be on the verge of something akin to a general strike, something not attempted, of course, since the 1920s? Well, former Labour Party MP Stephen Pound joins us in the studio this afternoon. We won't be unkind to say because you remember the 1920s, but...
it's a distant memory.
A distant memory, yeah, indeed. But...
I was actually on strike then.
I mean, there is a parallel, joking apart, in that I seem to remember at the time it was a Baldwin Conservative government, and the miners and a lot of the industries said, you don't care about us, you're ignoring us. And that's definitely the feeling from many of the union members this time round.
What it was about in 1926 was mainly a thing called the means test. And what happened was that we were in a time of high inflation. There was also a time of a coming together. The Ramsay-MacDonald Labour government and Philip Snowden, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, had in effect were about to go into coalition with the Conservatives, which they actually did in 1931. And what happened was that benefits were cut. And they were cut to ludicrous. People used to go around in South Wales in mining villages and look at the china on the mantelpiece and say, well, that's worth £5 bob, you want to get down the... It was brutal. This is completely different. Now we've got a situation where, 23% of the workforce is unionised. And I think that we're looking at this whole thing through the wrong end of the telescope. People are looking for a pay rise because inflation is high. Yeah. Inflation is high because of energy costs, because of wage inflation, because of price inflation. If the aristocracy of Labour, the 23% of this country who is unionised, all got the pay rises, all that would do would fuel inflation. We'd be back. And what about the 70-odd% who aren't in unions? What would happen to them?
Well, that's the argument for all these people caught out, not able to get to work because the RMT has stopped the trains, many of them in private industry without perhaps union representation, or the industrial muscle to get 7, 10, 12% pay increases. It does seem to be like a two-tier workforce to that degree.
Well, I would love it if I've been a trade unionist all my life, and I always will be, and I absolutely defend to my last drop of blood the right to be in a union. But I'd like to see the unions working more with the people who are on the hourly rate, who are on the, ring them up in the morning and bring them in for a job. The people who work...
Zero-hour contracts and so on.
Zero-hour contracts, people who are working in the distribution centres. Look, the unions have got money. The aristocrats have got the money at the present time. They can have a long strike. Fair play to them. But wouldn't it be marvellous to actually bring those people into the union so we can have decent pay and conditions for everybody? And the key thing here is that if a central component of inflation is energy costs, why on earth are we simply looking to put more and more money in the pockets of the energy companies by giving more and more pay rises to enable people to pay more and more in their electricity? What we should be doing, and I needn't bring Keir Starmer into this, but I think he happens to be spot on this one, is to actually bring in a price cap as it is at the moment so that actually takes the heat, if you pardon the expression, out.
Well, he's actually suggested this idea of putting a freeze on the price cap. But, I mean, the estimate is that could cost an extra $15 billion. Well, and the Institute of Fiscal Studies saying you can only probably get about $3.5 billion by backdating the windfall tax to January instead of May.
Well, it comes from about three different things. Firstly, you're absolutely right, backdate it to January. The second thing is the government have promised at the present time £400 to every single person, including Mick Lynch, you and me, all of us. Now, I think that seems to be a little bit odd because that would be nothing, it'd be a drop in the ocean if the price cap goes up from 1,197 up to 4,000, 5,000, whatever it is.
Or even 6,000 by next
God forbid.
January,
God forbid. But if that happens, look, then what alternative have the unions got but to try to demand the money? But it's self-defeating.
Let's speak to someone on the front line, not quite on the picket line yet, Francis, because the barristers have now voted quite strongly. I think the vote was 79.5% to escalate, to go on strike, after you've been offered 15% pay increase.
So this only applies to criminal barristers, as I said, so I'm not speaking for myself here. I have practiced in crime for 10 years. The background to that, though, is important, and it's really unconnected to inflation, other than the fact that obviously barristers will be affected by inflation as much as anyone else. We're talking about legal aid cases. Barristers are self-employed, so they're not technically going on strike, and more than technically, they're not actually going on strike. They're refusing to take on cases. They don't have to take those cases on if they don't wish to. They may have professional obligations if they've already accepted them, and that's a matter for them and the regulatory body. But essentially, the difficulty is you have what's called, by economies, a monopsony. You have one market, one provider, the state, for legal aid cases, and they determine the price. The problem with that is that if you have, you also have competition within the bar and competition elsewhere. In that,
the various
criminal
chambers,
barristers, criminal barristers could stop doing crime. If the criminal barristers do crime and regulatory work or other things, they are desperately getting out of crime because it is so unaffordable to continue.
Well, can I just put this one figure I spotted? A median salary or payment, because as you say, they're self-employed, for a junior barrister, £12,700. Yeah, exactly. Is that right?
I think that's a junior criminal barrister. And that can be, so that's £12,000 after having gone through, nowadays everyone has £10,000 a year plus whatever it is to cost to live during university. You also have to pay for yourself to go to bar school and for the living expenses about that. So that
pay for your gown, your wig and the rest of it?
Yes, yeah. And in addition to that, when you're a junior barrister, you are often doing many cases which will it often involve you working for up to 70 hours. So it can be, many are doing work for effectively less than minimum wage.
Is part of the mechanism what's going on, as we've been discussing elsewhere, that you feel, or that the barristers feel, they've been ignored by the government? Because I understand there have been efforts to meet with Dominic Raab for a year to discuss this as Justice Secretary, and they've not been successful.
That's correct. And the other issue, the wider public interest issue, is going back to the Tyson Fury case. You rely on a good profession to prosecute as well as defend cases, and to defend cases to the best ability that we have. One of the greatest public services we have in this country, and I would say after the defence of the realms, it's got to be the second duty of the state. If you don't have a state, then you don't have anything to go on. But within that, justice and the right to justice is an absolutely essential component. This goes back, incidentally, to the 1990s, at a time when legal aid was very generous. So the reductions in the 1990s, those haven't been replaced, and there have been a continual, real terms decrease in pay on a number of different occasions ever since. And that, if people leave the profession, and if 50% of trials at some point were not able to continue for lack of barristers, you will not have cases like the Fury case prosecuted.
Collapse of the legal system. Yeah. Last thought to you, Stephen, for the moment on this. Clearly, whoever's going to be the new Prime Minister is going to have a very big in-tray. Industrial relations, where does that come in that in-tray, given all the other problems?
It sounds very, very highly, but it's equal with energy costs. And I think that if, as it's likely, Liz Truss does become the next Prime Minister, I think that her charm offensive, when she concentrates on the offensive rather than the charm, is not going to be very, very helpful. To, insulting leaders.
The human hand grenade, as Dominic Cummings described, we understand.
Well, I'm sorry, but I think there's a real problem there. I think the one thing we've got to do is to actually recognise that this country, just see it as a totality, as the whole, instead of saying this particular section, this particular special interest group have these advantages. Let's look at the country as a whole. Let's look at what's good for the whole nation. And let's actually start thinking, should electricity be run by French and German companies? Should we be paying out 95% of the money that's made by the water companies in dividends and bonuses instead of new lagoons? Things like that. We should be looking at the country. And if she does that, I mean, I'm inclined not to vote Conservative, to be perfectly honest, but if I was going to be tempted by anything, it would be a Prime Minister who actually said, look, let's for once put the country over the party and try to solve this as one nation.